In yesterday's video, I showed you a table that shows the contrast of many of the people who were living in Paul's day in Romans chapter 1, verses 20 through 27, versus the life of Abraham from Romans chapter 4, verses 17 through 21, looking back at his life from Genesis. Now, these two verses do contrast the type of life and the purpose of life even that many people live that do not have faith versus those that do. Now, the differences might be clear. If you watched yesterday's video, those differences may become clear now that we've seen the first 4 chapters of Romans. Maybe those ideas stand out a little bit more clearly, but really this evidence was presented midway through Romans chapter 1, even just before this text that was in the table from yesterday. In Romans 1:17, Paul said that the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, and that the righteous live by faith. Then, in the very next verse, Romans 1:18, Paul wrote that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and the unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. The righteous live by faith in the truth. The unrighteous suppress the truth and thus cannot live by truth because, again, it has been suppressed. But notice this. When we suppress the truth, it doesn't mean that the truth does not exist. It just means that it is not acknowledged. We cannot remove truth. We can only remove the impact of truth. We can suppress it, but it is still there. Well, thus, Paul takes the rest of Romans chapter 1, all of Romans chapter 2, and a healthy chunk of Romans chapter 3 to discuss the sin, the suppression, and even the misinterpretation of the Scriptures by the Jews who thinks that the law will save him. He takes all of that text to help to the people to understand the misunderstanding of truth, the suppression of the real truth. Even the Jew who thinks they're living by truth, that they have a false understanding which is misguiding them. And then in Romans chapter 4, Paul provides the example of Abraham with a brief mention of David as well to show the reality of faith. Abraham believed God, and therefore God considered him righteous. It was counted to him as righteous. And again, as we've seen so many times, Paul is going back to the story in Genesis chapter 15, and that idea of counted to him as righteousness is specifically Genesis 15:6. Why would Abraham choose to believe God? Well, first off, Titus 1:2 says that it is impossible, it says that God never lies. And in Hebrews chapter 6, verse 18, it says it is impossible for God to lie. So if God says something, it should be believed. Abraham chose to believe this idea that God could be believed and was therefore found righteous because of it. And Paul wrote, as he's quoting from Habakkuk, the righteous will live by faith. Abraham lived by faith and was declared righteous because of that, which in turn allowed him to strengthen his faith and live more faithfully because of it. But in Romans 1, we have the exact opposite being true. They suppressed the truth, which caused them to move further from God. God made himself clearly known, it says in verse 19. Through general revelation, we can look at the stars, we can look at nature, and see that somewhere, somehow, that was created. But these people are determined to worship the creature rather than the Creator, verse 25, chapter 1. Thus, they chose to believe a lie rather than the truth. They chose themselves over a righteous God. They chose perverted sensuality rather than the holiness of God. They chose to believe themselves rather than the promise of God. And because of all of that, God turned these people over to themselves, gave them a debased mind, verse 28, declaring them unrighteous, and the result of that would be his wrath. In other words, our choices give us the opportunity to think that we are strong But when we think wrongly, we become weak. On the other hand, Abraham chose faith, and his weak body was made strong. And therefore, he glorified God, unlike the others. And his example, Abraham's example, should be the model that we follow today.